Ooh, look. Okay, good morning, everybody. Crosby wanted to stop by and say good morning to you all, so he figured he'd say hi to all of you. This is just a couple notes about cellular respiration. We were going to do these all together in class today, but we're all at different points, and some of us have our mentorship program today, so I just wanted to make this accessible for everybody by making a video version of these notes. So if you have this open right now, this should be open in present mode. Keep it in present mode the entire time you are working on 58. I just want to quickly go over the directions with you. What you're going to do is you're going to watch this video. After you watch the video, you're going to draw your steps of respiration using an entire piece of paper. You can see to the right an example of what this is going to look like. You're going to use your entire page. You're going to label everything. You're going to draw everything and try to make everything nice and neat. Don't judge my drawing skills. They are not the best. After you have drawn it out, you're going to go ahead and use slide 4 to write the total number of ATP made from each step. So you can see in the bottom left of my drawing, that is where I listed how much ATP comes from each step. So that is your game plan. And then when you're done, you're going to upload a quick picture of your drawing just to show me you have it done, and then mark this assignment as done. So on that note, let's do a little bit of review and then look at a couple steps. These slides are full of information, so I'm going to go ahead and hide my face so you can see everything on the slides. But don't worry, I'm still here. As far as what cellular respiration is, we've been talking about it for about a week now, and we have decided that the purpose of cellular respiration is to get ATP, or energy, from glucose. Plants can do both cellular respiration and photosynthesis. They have a chloroplast and they have a mitochondria, so they can do both processes. Animals, on the other hand, can only do cellular respiration. So animals such as ourselves, Crosby, lions, birds, we can only do cellular respiration because we do not have the chloroplast. Cellular respiration occurs in 3 steps. The first step is glycolysis, and this happens in the cell cytoplasm. The second step is the Krebs cycle, and this occurs in the cell's mitochondrial matrix. And the third and final step is the electron transport chain, which happens within the cell's inner mitochondrial membrane. You looked at all 3 of these steps the past couple of days, and today we're going to put all 3 steps together on one piece of paper. We've also talked about how photosynthesis and cellular respiration are linked. Looking at this picture, we can see that cellular respiration creates carbon dioxide and water. Those 2 are needed for photosynthesis. Photosynthesis then creates glucose and oxygen, which are needed for cellular respiration. So these 2 processes are linked together. When we breathe out, we're releasing carbon dioxide, which is needed in plants to photosynthesis. They then convert that carbon dioxide to oxygen, which is what we need to breathe in. We are also looking at what are the reactants in the products. This should be very, very straightforward for us. We have been practicing this for a while now. Whatever is on the left of the arrow is a reactant. Whatever on the right of the arrow is a product. So right here, I can see my arrow. Then I see glucose and oxygen. These are the 2 reactants of respiration. Then to the right of the arrow are my 3 products: carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Cellular respiration uses the 2 reactants of glucose and oxygen to create the 3 products of carbon dioxide, water, and energy. In assignment 57, we also saw these molecules called NADH and FADH2. And in a few of our pair decks yesterday, a couple of us asked, what are these things and why are they needed? NADH and FADH2 are not reactants or products. However, these molecules give energy for the 3rd step of respiration. NADH has 1 hydrogen, FADH2 has 2 hydrogens. During the electron transport chain, these 2 molecules give up their hydrogen ions and electrons to power the electron transport chain. So think of them kind of like electricity to power something. They power the reactions of the third step of respiration. Without the energy from these two molecules, there would not be the energy that's needed to convert ADP to ATP. So even though we don't see those two molecules in the reaction, they're still important because they provide the energy that's needed for step 3. That explains why they are made in steps 1 and 2. Now let's go ahead into the drawing we're going to be making today. So I want you to go ahead and just sit back and listen to this once, and then after you listen to it once, you'll have the chance to draw it out on your page. What we have here is, in all the gray space, is the cytoplasm. So we can see the cytoplasm, and then the red oval is representing the mitochondria. There is a space in the mitochondria called the matrix. The matrix is the empty space of the mitochondria. Then to the right, we have the mitochondrial's inner membrane. This squiggly line behind the 3 red ovals and the blue rectangle is the mitochondrial membrane. That is where step 3 happens. Now let's go ahead and go back to step 1 and look at what happens during step 1. What's it called? What are the different steps that occur? So starting with step 1 is known as glycolysis. I would encourage you to try practicing saying some of these words as you listen as well. So glycolysis is step 1. Glycolysis starts with glucose. Glucose is C6H12O6. Here I've drawn the 6 carbons that make up glucose. I know it has 6 because C6, 6 carbons make up glucose. During glycolysis, this glucose is converted into 2 pyruvate molecules. Pyruvate. Pyruvates each have 3 carbons. So basically what happens during glycolysis is glucose gets cut in half to make 2 3-carbon molecules. Pyruvate 1 and pyruvate 2. Additionally, it creates 2 ATP molecules and 2 NADH molecules. So we get some energy right away in the form of ATP, and then we get 2 NADHs, which we use later to power step 3. Step 1 of glycolysis, since it happens all in this gray space, that means it happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. Next, let's go ahead and see what happens during step 2. Before step 2 begins, the pyruvate moves into the mitochondrial matrix. So you can see this arrow is showing us that pyruvate 2 is moving into the mitochondrial matrix. It then begins step 2, known as the Krebs cycle. During the Krebs cycle, for each pyruvate that enters the matrix, 3 carbon dioxides are produced, 1 ATP, 1 FADH2, and 4 NADHs. So this pyruvate comes in, it completes the Krebs cycle. We now have 3 carbon dioxide molecules that are released to the outside, 4 NADHs, and 1 FADH2. These stay within the matrix. And finally, 1 ATP that could leave the mitochondria to be used as energy. The Krebs cycle then happens again, this time with the other pyruvate that was made from glycolysis. So this pyruvate enters into the matrix, starts the Krebs cycle. 3 more carbon dioxides are made and released to the outside. 4 more NADHs and 1 more FADH2 stay within the matrix. And finally, one more ATP is made. So by the end of step 2, the Krebs cycle, so far we have 4 ATPs, 10 NADHs, and 2 FADH2s. The NADH and FADH2 are going to be used in step 3. So let's go ahead and now look over all the way to the right. What we have all the way to the right is the inner membrane of the mitochondria. We can see the 3 carrier proteins shown in red. And then all the way to the right, a blue rectangle that represents ATP synthase. ATP synthase. Let's go ahead and look at what happens during step 3, known as the electron transport chain. During the electron transport chain, NADH and FADH2 enter the membrane. So we're now going to see one NADH move from over here, where this empty space now is, to over here. The NADH then loses a hydrogen. It gives up one of its hydrogens. Notice how it's now NAD+. That means that it lost a hydrogen, and then I can see the hydrogen floating next to the carrier protein. That hydrogen then gets pumped up through the carrier protein. The hydrogen then moves over towards the ATP synthase and pumps through the ATP synthase. The ATP synthase then kind of spins. I tried to make that animated. And what happens is ATP and water, sorry for the Crosby noises, ATP and water are produced. That's how NAD+ works. For each NADH, 3 ATP are produced. So even though I'm only showing 1 ATP being made by this one NADH, it could actually make 3. So I'd have 3 yellow ATPs over here. Since we have 10 NADHs that were made by glycolysis in Krebs, that means that 30 total ATP would be made from just NADH. Now let's look at what FADH2 does. FADH2 is leaving the matrix and coming over to the inner membrane to begin the electron transport chain. It does the same thing as what NADH did. It gives up a hydrogen, or in this case, 2 hydrogens. That hydrogen has been separated from the molecule. It is now pumped through the carrier protein. After it's pumped through the carrier protein, it enters into the ATP synthase, which is shown by the blue. Once again, the blue is ATP synthase. As it pumps through, it causes the synthase to spin, which creates, once again, ATP and water. So as hydrogens move through ATP synthase, ATP is produced and water is produced. For each FADH2, 2 ATP would be made. So from the Krebs cycle, we gained 2 FADH2s. Each would make 2 ATP. That would mean that 4 total ATP come from FADH2. So this picture is just showing us each step. Here's what happens in glycolysis to the left, Krebs cycle at the middle, electron transport chain to the right. If we were to actually draw out each step, we would show each NADH making 3 ATP, each FADH2 making 2 ATP. This is the last idea that I want you to know, is how much total ATP do we get from respiration. Looking back at that picture, during glycolysis, 2 ATP are made. During the Krebs cycle, 2 are made. During the electron transport chain from the 10 NADH, they were made from glycolysis in the Krebs cycle, 30 ATP are produced. And then in the electron transport chain from the typo, this should say 2. I'll change that in your slides in a minute. From the 2 FADH2 from the Krebs cycle, 4 ATP are produced. So in total, 30 to 38 ATP are produced during all 3 steps of cellular respiration. 38 would be if all the energy is saved and none is lost. Sometimes some energy is lost because not everything makes it to the membrane, or some ATP gets used in the process to move molecules around, which is why 30 to 38 is more accurate, because sometimes energy is lost in the process.